Tonight's guest in the third of the media speaker series, and I should say that the fourth one is next Wednesday, same time, same station, is Sir Harold Evans, the former editor of the Times of London and the Sunday Times, the former president of Random House, author of a wonderful recent memoir called My Paper Chase, which chronicles one of the most interesting and influential careers in old-fashioned journalism. Tonight we're going to talk about old-fashioned journalism and new-fashioned journalism. Paul Steiger is perhaps unique in the country today in having run one of the premier news organizations, the Wall Street Journal, for many years. Before that, he was at the Times of London. Well, at the LA Times, although he started originally as a reporter at the Wall Street Journal after Yale. And as he said in the class that he taught so beautifully this afternoon to my students, I think he said something like the angel came down as he was not tired of the Wall Street Journal, but had been there quite a long time, running all of the news stuff at the Journal, apart from the opinion, the non-controversial opinion pages. And the angel was this absolutely stunning new internet investigative journalism site called ProPublica, which he will tell you all about, and it has had enormous influence already in its 2+ years with its extremely important stories that have landed on the front page of the New York Times and LA Times and other papers and so on. It's a new form of distribution of journalism based on old-fashioned standards of ethics, accountability, and digging, which are the essentials of great journalism. Paul Steiger.
Well, thank you very much, Charles, and thank you all for coming. And because you all have access to the internet, and so that nobody has any secrets, I thought I would disclose up front that when I was running the Wall Street Journal, one of the things I did was close the Cleveland bureau. So if that hasn't destroyed all credibility with this audience, I did it reluctantly, but I did do it. As Charles said, I had the great honor and pleasure, really right up to the last minute, to edit the Wall Street Journal for 16 years, longer than anybody else was in that job. And I had I was about to reach the age of mandatory retirement, and my wife had said to me that if I catch you in sweatpants past 10:30 in the morning during the week, it's not divorce, it's murder. So I knew that something would have to engage me enough to get me out of our apartment in Manhattan, or my demise would be early. And as luck would have it, as Charles suggested, in the fall of 2006, I was approached by a very wealthy couple who live in San Francisco, who I had known for many years, not as close friends, but as very good sources. They were dynamos in the financial industry. And they told me they wanted to give $10 million a year to support investigative reporting, but they hadn't figured out how they wanted to do it, and so they were talking to lots of people that they knew in journalism. And I said, fine, I would be happy to give them my ideas. I didn't think that much about it, but I pondered it over the next couple of months, and then the next time I saw them, I laid out what was the skeleton of what became ProPublica. And to my surprise, they loved it and asked me if I would be willing to run it. I said I was committed to the journal to the end of 2007. That was fine. And so here I am, 2.5 years after we started. And you know, in addition to saving my life from whatever weapons my wife had in mind, why I was drawn to this is that I see a huge need for the kind of thing that we're doing. As I don't need to tell this audience, the internet has brought lots of good things to the world, but it has also destroyed the business model of the large and mid-sized metropolitan newspaper, and has damaged the business models of a number of other kinds of news organizations. And the result, for reasons that I won't bore you with, has been not only to produce shrinking staff size, in some cases closing of publications, bankruptcy of publications. I mean, many of the proudest names in the newspaper business are today operating in bankruptcy. The Chicago Tribune, the LA Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, for example. But the focus of reduction in staff has been particularly harsh on investigative reporting and foreign reporting for the same reason. They're both very expensive to produce, and so you get more more bucks for the firing when you lose one of those folks than if you lose other sorts of reporters. And the reason that's important is that I think the media do perform an important function in our democracy by shining a spotlight on abuse of power and failure to uphold the public interest, and giving the public the information they need to affect change. And that's what our mission is. It's the only mission we have at ProPublica. And the principles are simple. We have 35 journalists, which makes us the largest team of journalists devoted entirely to this kind of work. We're not the first nonprofit in this field. There are some others, but what makes us different is that we don't just sort of publish our stuff as a white paper and put it out to the world. There's nothing wrong with that, but what it tends to get you is stories by the wire services that are that don't appear on radio and television at all, and which tend to appear on page A17 in 20 or 5 newspapers and appear nowhere else. Instead, what we do is we publish everything on our own website. I'll get to that a little bit later. And but our biggest stories, we partner with existing media organizations, which give us, and that gives us tremendous leverage, because when a news organization has a major story exclusively, they tend to give it much greater display and hullabaloo than they do if they're just picking up something off the wires. An example from last summer, one of our reporters did a just shocking piece that ran. It was a shocking piece about the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, in which one of the major hospitals in town was cut off by flooding. It lost power. 90-degree temperatures. Patients were gasping. You know, the hospitals, as you know, run on electricity, and the equipment wasn't working. The air conditioning wasn't working. And in this admittedly horrible and scary situation, some of the doctors decided to give lethal doses of morphine to some of the patients because they were afraid they couldn't evacuate them. Sherry's story was explosive. It was all on the record, including 2 doctors who acknowledged that they participated in this. And when on our own website, it got 60,000 page views, which is a lot. But the New York Times put it on the cover of its Sunday magazine, and on its website, it got 1.1 million page views, and the print version typically gets 2 to 3 times the readership of the online version. So you can see the tremendously greater leverage that one gets by participating with what my children call the dying media, but they're still quite large, and it allows the story to reach many more people and thus have more impact. The second principle we had was to use digital techniques, and to rapidly make them part of our process of both getting information and distributing it, but to not fetishize them. In other words, if a traditional way of communicating something worked, go ahead and use that. And the third thing was to transform to the next generation, or carry over to the next generation, the skill sets and the ethical instincts that have been part of this process for a long time. But as the number of people doing it was shrinking, the risk that some of these skills would be lost were mounting. And I had this image when we started that, I could have filled the room with Pulitzer Prize winners. I mean, we had, when we started, 17 reporting openings, and without a single advertisement, we got 1,400 resumes, bingo. But I didn't want to fill the room with Pulitzer Prize winners. I mean, we've got 8, and that's enough. Although it'd be nice if we won a couple ourselves, if we could add to that number. But my notion was that if, we had a mix of veteran people and younger people. The younger folks could have the culture transmitted to them, and so we would expand the universe of people capable of doing this stuff. Well, that's happened, but a far greater impact has been the other way. That is, the kids come in with digital as part of their genetic material. I mean, that's just the way they view the world, and they have taught the veterans much more than they have learned. So as a result, we've dragged the older generation into the older generation is not as old as I am, but people in their late 30s and 40s and 50s into a comfort level with modern techniques, and even extending the envelope of the modern techniques, and that has been a joy for me to watch. So where are we now? We did our first major stories in June of 2008, after opening our doors in January of 2008. we were pretty much, and our website launched in a rudimentary fashion at about that time. In September of that year, we were fully staffed. And so 2009 has been our first full year. I mean, I'm delighted to say that I think we're 2 years ahead of where I thought we'd be. There were 3 challenges that I saw go, I said 2 years ahead, 1 year ahead of where I thought we would be. There were 3 challenges that I saw going in. One was, could we get information that would have real impact from a standing start? You know, and I called somebody up and said, I'm a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. They return your call. If you call and say you're a reporter from ProPublica, you're not so sure that they're going to return the call. But in fact, our folks have been able to break through those barriers. You know, not always as quickly as I want, but with considerable success. So that this summer, this past summer, we crossed one watershed where in July, 2 of our reporters were able to demonstrate that it took the board that licenses nurses in California as much as 6 years and an average of 3.5 years to process the taking away of a license from a nurse who has been convicted of stealing drugs from patients, beating up patients, being zonked out when patients face critical care issues. And there were patients who were dead as a result, patients who were permanently disabled as a result. But what these nurses were able to do, because they still had their licenses, was they would be fired. They would get in the car and drive 13 blocks, there's another hospital, and they start the whole process all over again. Well, we partnered with the Los Angeles Times on that story, and it ran the story huge on their front page with 4 open pages inside on a Sunday in July. On Monday, the next day, the governor fired the majority of the board, everyone he had the authority to fire. He appointed new board members with the mandate to fix what he'd read in the paper. And that's what he said in his own words. And the day after that, they appointed a new executive director with the same mandate. So that said to me, you know, we are able to get information that's of significance such that it can move the system, whatever the system is, the political system, the business system, the education system, to make change. And that phenomenon, not quite that starkly, but that phenomenon has been repeated multiple times since then. Secondly, there was a question of whether people would partner with us. You know, 5 or 6 years ago, people in my kind of job at the Wall Street Journal would just simply not take stuff from outsiders. You know, we don't know where that story's been. We're not going to put it in our publication. But the business dynamics that I alluded to earlier, and the fact that the competitive environment is still challenging for these folks, have meant that they're much more willing than they would have been just a few years earlier to consider taking our stories. And once we get them to consider it, we often get them hooked. I'm going to give you another example. In the fall of 2008, one of our reporters discovered that the Air Marshal Service, which tried to which wanted to vastly increase its size after 9/11. On 9/11, there were 35 air marshals, and they wanted to go to 100 times that. But in the process, they managed to pull in a certain number of bad apples. Our reporter found that there were, I don't know, a couple dozen who had used their badges to smuggle drugs. There were another number that had used their badges to set up assignations with underage boys. There was one gentleman who hooked up with a hitman by the name of the Crucifixer because he wanted to send his wife to the next world. And then there were a bunch of people that were convicted of drunk driving. Now, in the U.S., if there's no injury or death, a lot of people don't regard drunk driving with that level of seriousness. But think about it. Do you want somebody drunk with a gun on your plane? And so we went to USA Today with this story because I figured USA Today is the road warrior's Bible. Any business person is going to stumble over the paper going out of the room in the Holiday Inn in the morning. And if I had called the editor of USA Today and said we wanted to do a story about quality control in hiring at the Air Marshal Service, he would have laughed at me because he's got half a dozen people covering travel. It's a very important thing for their paper. But when I told him about the Crucifixer, he said, "You're kidding me," except he used more colorful language. And so we were, off to the races with a relationship that is now, we've done maybe a dozen stories with USA Today, and we have more in the works. So we've been able to get in the door much more quickly than I thought we would. It hasn't been totally smooth, and look, sometimes our story's not as good as we think it is, and people say no, thank you. But then we can always put it on our own website. And the third hurdle that I felt we had to get over was even before we had written a word, there were some people helpfully writing on the web that we were going to be useless because our funding came from a couple of people that also funded moderately lefty political causes. And of course, this stuff was going to be left-wing tilted and would have no credibility. Well, I mean, what I said to people is watch what we do, and I reminded them that when I was at the Journal, my publisher and CEO, both very good friends, but significantly farther to the right than the Sandlers are to the left. And if I could do down-the-middle news reporting for them at the Journal, we can do down-the-middle news reporting. Well, we've since been quoted by Fox News and by some of the right-wing radio commentators. So that, while the notion that we're against capitalism hasn't disappeared, it is much less of a problem that I feared it might be. So that's I thought we'd be 2 years in solving those problems. We were a little more than a year in getting past those hurdles. What do we have to do next? We have to keep advancing the performance of our journalism, both in the importance of what we find out and reporting of it, but also in pushing the envelope of the use of digital techniques, both for finding information and for distributing it. And I'll get back to that in 1 second. But the third thing is to diversify our funding, because launch funders, Herbert, Marion, Sandler, believe, and I agree with them, that we're on sounder footing for the future if we can diversify our funding. And also to keep our nonprofit status with the IRS, we have to do that. So last year we raised $1 million from other than them. And this year we're well on our way to raising $2.5 million from other sources. So we've got a long way to go. I'd like to get that up to 75 or 80%, but we're rolling. And on the improving the use of digital technology, both to find important information and distribute it, that's just one of the more exciting aspects of what we do. It is extraordinary how fast those techniques are developing, and it's great when my colleagues who are, and the ones leading this are babies. Several of them are in their 20s. But it's just extraordinary. And I give you an example of how we're getting information. One of these kids is a woman named Amanda Mikkel, who's like 27, and Amanda she's totally self-taught, but she's managed to assemble through the web large numbers of volunteers. She did something for the Huffington Post called Off the Bus during the 2008 election, where she assembled several hundred volunteer campaign workers for the Obama campaign, and I think she did it for other campaigns as well. But what she got them to do was report on stuff that the journalists don't have access to. And there were a number of things that made big news. The one that I remember most starkly was when Obama and Clinton were still fighting for the nomination. Candidate Obama made a pit stop in San Francisco, and he was chatting with some of these campaign workers, and he made a remark that as soon as it was out of his mouth, I'm sure he wanted to suck it back in, but you can't do that, which was that some folks in our society that were losing out in the global race for success were clinging to things like religion and guns for solace. And of course, Hillary just beat him around the head with this quote. Well, no journalist was there when he said it, but one of, several of Amanda's army were there, and they had their phones. And so not only did they have the words, they had him on digital recording, so Amanda could put that up. Well, for us, Amanda's assembled 4,000 volunteers, and we can do stuff like this. We want to keep track of the stimulus program, which has a million different manifestations. But one of the things we wanted to do was we picked out 500 salient projects that we wanted to follow. And when I was at the Wall Street Journal, I had 700 journalists. I could not take that on. At ProPublica with 35 journalists, can't take that on. Amanda goes, type, type, type. And she gets people to sign up, and so they dutifully go out and say, are they pouring asphalt? Are they banging away on this bridge or not? And we're able to keep track of these programs on a weekly, sometimes a daily basis. In terms of distribution, another thing we followed very closely is this effort to have some government subsidies combined with banks and mortgage bankers and try to revamp loans that are headed for foreclosure so people can stay in their houses. And this is a program that has just got Americans furious all across the country. So the banks have certain incentives to not go rapidly, and when a bureaucracy like a bank gets an incentive to not move rapidly, guess what? They don't move rapidly. And so we have a couple of reporters who've written a number of things on this subject and have gotten some banks to move faster. But a couple of our tech geniuses got the idea, why don't we set up a matchmaking service? So what we've done is we have like 700 people around the country who have given us their names and have said, we're having this kind of problem or that kind of problem. We've got them in a database. So we did this colored map that we put up on our site with dots showing, where we have people. And then you can click on the dot and find out exactly what town it is. If it's part of your brief as a journalist, and you can be a traditional journalist or you can be a blogger, you can then email us, and then we will ask the person, or more than one person who corresponds to that dot, whether they want to talk to this particular reporter or blogger. What happens is, so we put these people together with the matchmaking service, and so when the local reporter calls the local office of the bank says, the guy says, my God, I'm going to be in lights, and miraculously, the mortgage gets revamped. And this is a case of using the leverage of lots of small news organizations all around the country to jump on the stuff that we've dug up from a national perspective. So, I mean, you can tell I'm inordinately excited by the opportunity to do this. I can get really boring really fast talking about it, so I think I'm going to stop. But I just want to say that there are many different pathways toward filling in some of the gaps left in what journalism provides to society as a result of the internet revolution. But there are ways to close those gaps, and I think that I'm very excited to be one part of one avenue. There are multiple other ones, and it is a joy to me to be able to talk to you about it, and I would be delighted to respond to questions or comments that you might have about this or any other subject you think I might be helpful on. Thank you very much for listening. Back there.
Sure. Victoria, what is your business model? You're going forward. You need to raise $5 million a year in contributions. Is that the deal, or are you going to sell your stories? I mean, what is the dynamic here?
People hear the question?
No. Let me ask that everybody, when you ask the question, please stand and project.
Yeah. I think I can summarize it. The question is, what is our business model? Is it alms for the poor, or something more detailed than that? Well, it's heavily alms for the poor. This is not a time to try to go sell stories. I mean, Bill Keller, the editor of the New York Times, is happy to use our stuff if, I told him, well, this story cost us $100,000. We'd like to have you pay $25,000. He would tell me no, because he's laying people off and furloughing people and doing buyouts and that sort of thing. And if you're trying to have your stories have impact, you want to get them in the New York Times. But so how do we get the money for doing this? And our plan is as follows. I mean, first of all, the Sandlers are our angels. They they have, when we started, they said they would guarantee funding at the $10 million a year level for 3 years. And then at the end of each year, if things are going well, they'll add another year at the back end. And they've now done that twice. So we have 3 years in front of us. But how do we get money from other than they? First of all, particularly at an interim stage, we're going to foundations. And we've had money from MacArthur, from Knight, we just had a grant from Hewlett. There are several other major foundations where we're in the very final stages of getting money from them. Now, some of you who are in academia know that foundations, fickle is the word that others would use. I wouldn't use that word, but they can want to go off in another direction, so you can't count on them for very often for multiple years. But they have been a big help for us to to start diversifying our funding. Secondly, is major gifts, and I'm lucky that Herb Sandler seems to know just about every other English-speaking billionaire in the universe, and so he's grabbing them by the lapels and trying to get them to sign up for major gifts. Third, we are looking toward a underwriting or sponsorship type of approach to major corporations, much the way public television and radio does. And we have to make sure that they understand that just as they need to understand with public television and radio that this doesn't exempt you from being investigated by us. The one thing we won't do is put the notice of your underwriting next to a story blasting you or your industry. But other than that, you get nothing. And people with experience in this field say that that holds promise for us. Fourth, the digital environment is changing rapidly. There have been a few stories written about the latest product from Apple, for example. There is momentum in traditional media to depart from gingerly from the notion that information wants to be free. I mean, I've never had information talk to me and say, I want to be free. I mean, I don't know where this comes from, but the Wall Street Journal raises $100 million in subscription fees to its website. So there may be some potential there, and if we're not going to be out in front of that, but if the dynamic changes, and for example, the New York Times and Washington Post websites have a paid element to them, we may be able to ride on those coattails. Now, there are other things we're thinking about, but we do not envision ourselves with the kind of journalism we do of having a traditional profit-making model anytime soon. There are lots of other forms of online journalism that have paths to profitability that are quite reasonable. We see us as like other nonprofits that are of significant importance to the community, like a university, like a ballet company, like certain kinds of clinics. That this kind of work is an important contribution to the functioning of democracy, and I think that I'm seeing as I go around that more people are recognizing that, and we're hoping that they'll write checks. Yes.
Interested in knowing what mechanism you screen and/or select for topics that you wish to investigate in depth.
Very good question. I've always believed that even after I ceased being a reporter, that the best stories bubble up from reporters who were out there rather than editors who were sitting in ivory towers. And it's not always true. Every once in a while, an editor gets a good idea. Last 10 years, I've had one or two. So we have a structure set up to do that, so that we have now 18 reporters, or if you count interns, 21. And each of them is assigned to a senior editor who monitors what they do. And when the reporter has multiple possible stories that he or she can pursue, a conversation ensues with the editor, and the editor says, well, this one is really exciting. This one, not so much. Why don't you go that way? And then roughly once a week, I and the managing editor, Steve Engelberg, have a meeting with all the senior editors where we talk about, what are you guys, what are your guys working on right this minute, and what's next for them, and what have you put on the back burner? And sometimes we'll say, you might want to bring that one up to the front burner. So it's a process where we invite, there's no real hierarchy. We invite people to toss ideas into the hopper, and because we're relatively small, people don't have to jump through hoops to do it. Yes?
In comparing traditional print journalism with so-called new journalism, or the net journalism, is there a difference in the substance of the stories that emerge, topics that are covered, things like that?
There are enormous differences. And one of the things that I feel is an important function for us is that that we bring to the new dynamic some of the old principles that are very important. I mean, for example, bloggers, and I love bloggers. My wife blogs 7 days a week in addition to designing jewelry. And, but they often do not feel any obligation to call the people they're writing about. I mean, in some cases, they're writing about people who won't return their calls anyway, so it doesn't make much sense. But if you're writing something that is criticizing something that you've just read that somebody has done, maybe it'd be a good idea to call them to find out whether they really are doing it. And so we make that an important principle of the way we operate. So we use the blog forum all the time, but when we have something that is edgy or prickly in particular, we're creating a culture where the response is automatically you call the person and try to get a response. We are, I never believed in the two-source rule, that all the president's men popularized, at the Washington Post. You can't do a story without two sources. I mean, if Ben Bernanke tells me that he's going to nudge the federal funds rate up by 1/4 point, I don't need to talk to anybody else because I'm pretty sure that he knows whereof he speaks. On the other hand, you could have 5 people tell you something that they know is going on, and they may have all heard it from the same drunk who is totally confused. So multiple sources in and of themselves are not a magic pill. But if you have one source, particularly if the source is off the record, you want to try to see if just how good that source is and can you broaden it out. So I mean, there are things like that which, because the web goes so fast, and because so much of the web is opinion driven, if what you're about is doing stuff that has credibility, so that people will act on it, you want to try to be down the middle, and that means pulling people back from their opinions, and they still have their opinions. We all have opinions, but learn professionalism that allows you to be much more sure that what you're writing is true. Yes?
Going back to the question of sources, what is your policy on anonymous sources? Because it seems like a lot of people in Wall Street, the New York Times and so on, grant anonymity to people who are not really risking anything, but they just want to pursue an agenda. What is the policy that you have about using anonymous sources, apart from people who are leaking information that's really risky, like the Pentagon Papers or something like that, but just want to be anonymous for no particular reason other than anonymous?
The question, for those who didn't hear, is what's our policy on anonymous sources? And I use the same policy that I used at the Wall Street Journal, which is, first of all, we do not allow negative blind quotes. We, on occasion, I'll try to explain the difference, we will take from an anonymous source if we are confident that the source knows what he or she is talking about, information that may be damaging to an individual, but we will not let somebody say, something like this, I knew the day he walked into the office that he was an idiot. Kind of that kind of thing, which some reporters like to do to punctuate, sort of long strings of prose, we flatly don't allow. Secondly, I believe that information that is not sourced, publicly sourced, is less credible. And every sentence you have in a story that's attributed to an unnamed source weakens the credibility of that story. Now, there are times when the only way you're going to get crucial information is to accept it on that basis. But I push back very hard on reporters and editors to avoid using blind sources. Even, sometimes they want to do it to reinforce what someone has said on the record. I said, you don't need that. It's fine that you had this conversation. It helps buttress your reporting, but it weakens the credibility of the story every time you say someone who asked not to be identified. So it's not something where I'm going to say we'll never use that, but it's something that I recognize threatens credibility, and I try to avoid it whenever I can. Yes, ma'am.
What percentage of your coverage is U.S. Based issues, and what percent is foreign, or maybe not related to the U.S. but just about another country?
We focus. We will send reporters anywhere in the world, and we've sent reporters all over the place. But our focus is what will be of interest to a U.S. audience. It's not because we don't like overseas audiences. I mean, when I was editing the journal, I was responsible for the European edition and the Asian edition and the Latin American edition and so on. But with our size, I've just made the decision as sort of a resource allocation issue that we should focus on things of interest to a U.S. Audience. But that can mean sending a reporter anywhere, and we've done it.
You mentioned that you're embracing digital technology and even pushing the envelope on it, but you also talked about the importance of having your work appear in print because of the reach you get from that. Can you discuss how that strategy or your thoughts on that might change, especially as print continues to shake out and there may be fewer opportunities or fewer print readers to see your work?
Very good question. Over time, we expect our own website and other digital delivery methods, to the handheld, for example, to gradually become more important, or maybe faster than gradually, and traditional media, particularly print media, to become less so. I mean, 3 of our 40-plus partners have gone out of business since we partnered with them, and and the attrition is going to continue, and in my chomping at the bit colleagues whose mission is to expand the reach of our digital distribution say to me, and they sometimes plant in sessions like these their digerati friends to ask the same question. Well, couldn't you and your question was worded very differently. I know when one of those. Yeah, right. Why don't you, if you kept, if not all, a higher proportion of your stories for your website alone, your website would expand faster, and what you're doing is delaying the inevitable day when the website reigns supreme. And my answer to that is, my mission is not to build the world's greatest news website the fastest. My mission is to have impact. And when I can get hundreds of thousands, even millions of additional readers and or viewers or audience, whatever you want to say, and where that's relevant to the story, to have a bigger audience, then I'm going to do that. I'm not going to leave that on the table, because the mission is to have impact over time. It's not to build the best website as fast as possible. Having said that, we spent a lot of time figuring out how to get a greater footprint on the web, no question. Yes, sir.
In the hospital investigative story you alluded to at the beginning, why did you partner with the New York Times rather than the New Orleans paper?
We have partnered with the New Orleans Timespicayune on a number of stories. I mean, they're a favored partner of ours, but this is a story that was about more than, it was of interest way beyond New Orleans. What it really gets at is how are decisions going to be made about triage, In other words, how do you decide who gets the care and who doesn't? And this is something which the same reporter, Sherry Fink, who's she's kind of amazing. She's got MD and PhD degrees from Stanford, and she still likes being a journalist. It turns out that after this story appeared, it led her to some major studies and efforts being done around the country in anticipation of a 1918 style flu. Remember when all the concern about swine flu that was out there, and she found out that this stuff was being done in secret. by a small group of doctors and, and professors and lawyers. Nobody was being told. And some of the decisions were the things, about which the public might have a different point of view. And we partnered with papers around the country to report on those things. And bingo, as soon as you shined a light on them, the folks said, we're sorry, we'll invite the public in, and they backed off some of the more controversial provisions. So this is a very broad-based topic. And then the other thing is that we knew that the New York Times had, New York Times Magazine had paid particular attention to retrospectives on Katrina. And this was, the timing was right for the anniversary of Katrina, so it just came together. But we've done major stuff with the Times Pick, including stuff that they entered for a Pulitzer Prize. I mean, entering it and winning it are two different things, but they did that. Yes.
Do you ever think about, I don't mean continuously, but maybe one-off partnering with TV programs? I'm thinking 60 Minutes or Discovery Channel or 2020, yeah.
The answer is not only we think about it, we've done it. Our very first story was on 60 Minutes, and we've been on 2020. We have been on public television, public radio. We're about to do a very major piece this weekend with NPR, or with a unit of NPR. So we have a frontline producer who is in our office because we're doing several projects with them. So, I made a decision early on, which is subject to review, but that we would have YouTube capability, not broadcast capability, because to get that level of capability, you need to spend a lot of money. And as we've added more kids, I mean, our ability to do this at less and less cost. I mean, we just added this young woman, Marion Wong, who's like 23, and she's relentless. But one of the things she did as an intern when she was at Northwestern was to spend a summer in North or South Dakota, I forget which, working for a TV station. And she reported, did the stand-up, and edited. Aside from the fact that she looks like she's 11 years old, we're absolutely and totally professional television productions. And instead of costing, $150,000 a pop, they probably cost about $3.99 a pop. So that curve is moving in our direction. And so here's where we collaborate with the big guns. They do the TV stuff, we do the gumshoe stuff, and it's a good partnership. 2 years from now, you're all going to know Marion's name, and because you'll be seeing her on YouTube or whatever is performing that function. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many whistleblowers from important places like the Department of Defense, all sorts of places have come to you and brought you stuff. I'm thinking specifically of this absolutely amazing film which just surfaced on a killing of innocent news people in Baghdad by American forces. One of the most shocking things I've ever seen. You get all the setup through the conversation, the overheard conversation on the airplane, the deliberate killing of people. They don't even know whether they're carrying any weapons, which they weren't. And this came from an insider in the Department of Defense. It's now all over, of course, the internet. And have you been able to gain lots of that stuff at all?
We have gained nothing of that moment, which is, as you say, truly extraordinary. But yes, we have people calling us, and as you know from your experience, the whistleblowing set is, you know, they are a lot of fun to deal with because they tend to have issues, and you have to kind of work your way through their issues. But boy, when you can get something like that, it's worth it. And you know, I mean, our veteran reporters in particular have got sources, you know, deep in various areas of government and business. I mean, it's an example. One of our reporters was absolutely out front when the Obama administration decided to back off in various stages its Guantanamo policy. And you know, we partnered with the Washington Post on those stories, but our reporter was getting, you know, kind of the leading news there, and it was from whistleblowers of the sort you're talking about.
Let's take one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
You described a relatively young workplace at ProPublica, and one of the common stereotypes leveled against 20-somethings and 30-somethings who've basically been raised on the internet and who are attached to social networking, like Twitter and Facebook and other devices, is that they lack the social and the interactive skills of previous generations. Could you comment on that?
Gosh, I don't see that. I mean, yeah, you know, we a couple of our web producers are, you know, sort of classic nerd personalities, but you know, they don't have to leave the office. I mean, you know, they're and they're absolutely marvelous. And the other thing is that you know, they're coexisting with, I mean, you know, forget me, I'm the freak in the corner office, but you know, the first reporter I hired was Jeff Gerth, you know, who had 2 Pulitzer Prizes at the New York Times, and Jeff is almost as old as I am. He's in his 60s, and we've got, you know, other folks in their 30s and 40s, and so there's cultural mixing that goes on, and the people that have gaps in their personalities are you know, they're not getting, they are who they are, but they're rubbing off on each other in ways that I hoped would happen, and I think they're all the better for it.
Okay, one more.
Thank you for the fascinating speech, and I'm not a professional journalism or in any capacity in this profession, but I'm just curious in terms of having impact and promoting democracy, what do you perceive the biggest strengths or uniqueness compared to other for-profit journalism agency besides your nonprofit status?
You know, to be honest, I don't think that for-profit or nonprofit really makes a difference. You know, I edited the Wall Street Journal for 16 years, and in all 16 of those years, we tried to make a profit. There were a couple that was pretty close to the edge, and maybe we didn't. But investigative reporting was, you know, a major part of our portfolio, and we went about it pretty much the same way that we do it at ProPublica. The one difference, and it sometimes has significance, is that at the Journal, I was looking to serve an audience, you know, with a menu of stories that audience would be interested in. At ProPublica, we're looking for stories that are likely to have impact, that are likely to tell the public something that they didn't know and promote action. And so one of the questions that I wouldn't tend to ask at the Journal, I mean, sometimes I did, but we ask it all the time at ProPublica is, okay, you have these two possible projects you could be working on. I can see the potential impact on this one. What's the potential impact on that one? If the reporter can't give me a persuasive answer, then we're going to do this one. So that's about the only difference, and it doesn't show up that often. Thank you very much.